FPC are bringing a bill forward to preserve cash. So they're bringing a motion, a bill, C400, I think 483 maybe, and they're doing that in order to preserve cash, which I thought was interesting. Norway's just passed a motion that says that and comes into force today, so that's interesting as well. No truth on Truth and Reconciliation Day. Oh, that's wrong. No truth on Truth and Reconciliation Day, because it's a lie based on a lie. The whole shebang is a falsehood. And I said years ago, it's the third one or the fourth one, I can't remember when it came in, and I said you can't have two holidays, federal holidays, that are 2 weeks apart that are directly at odds with each other, right? Thanksgiving and Truth and Reconciliation Day are directly at odds with each other. And so I said years ago, they're going to get rid of this thing. They're going to get rid of Thanksgiving, and they're going to just say, celebrate Truth and Reconciliation Day. It's virtually the same thing. Like, it's virtually the same thing. We just have to celebrate how terrible you are. That's what we have to do, right? And you can't have unity, and Thanksgiving celebrates unity, right? Like two different peoples coming together to celebrate a prosperous harvest and to continue life and so on and so forth, and to move forward together. Can't have that when you're trying to smash the patriarchy or whatever the heck they're trying to accomplish, destroy our current society in order to bring forth a new world order, one world government society that you couldn't get from a functioning society. So you have to destroy ours. And while you're destroying ours, you might as well remove our culture as well, which is what the communist Marxists are doing. And so no truth on Truth and Reconciliation Day is by design. And Zachary Tisdale says, what we see across Canada with Truth and Reconciliation Day is straight up Marxism. They believe that the only way to atone for past discrimination is with more discrimination now, and they're shoving it down children's throats. Evil, and it is evil. Strange Animal says, I'm at Saskatchewan Polytechnique in Moose Jaw. They're making us take this day off and canceling the Thanksgiving stat. Nope. That's a big fat nope for me, dog. I would be taking Thanksgiving off, and I would be informing my employer that they better damn well pay me. Actually, I don't think I'd say anything. I just wouldn't show up on Thanksgiving. And then if my pay was wrong for whatever reason, I would bring it up with the powers that be, and then I would take them to court to make sure that I get paid for that day and let them explain to whoever why they did that. Although that may inadvertently result in setting precedent that if you want to take away Thanksgiving and replace it with Truth and Reconciliation Day, that would be better and will in fact incentivize you to do that. And bingo, bango, bongo, now we've got everybody doing it, right? So, it's interesting. And I'm interested, is Scott Moe going to step in on this and say, like, you can't have an emergency session and say you can't do that, right? Scott Moe, where are you, buddy? Pierre Poilievre. Now, I don't know what I expected. But I was hoping that we weren't going to continue this farce after Justin Trudeau, and Pierre Poilievre is signaling that, oh yes, we're going to continue this farce. We're going to continue it good. And he says, thank you to Chief Benedict and Elder Brandt for accepting my offerings on National Day for Truth and Reconciliation as we take steps on the path to true healing together. Somebody said, oh, well, I know that Truth and Reconciliation Day is based on lies, but there were things that we did wrong and we should atone for that. And my opinion on the whole thing is Truth and Reconciliation Day is based on lies. If you want to make a day that's based on historical accuracies, then put the historical accuracies you want to have forward and make your case to make that day about what you want it to be about. Whatever historical injustices you want to celebrate. And maybe, whatever, if the people who are making laws and days agree with you, then they'll go forward. But I feel like we shouldn't just continue celebrating a day based on a complete falsehood just because some people, it would be politically uncomfortable to unwind it. I think we should unwind it. Ferryman's Toll says, F off. So, yeah, they're not getting in on this. I was out with my family yesterday and looking around. We were at places where schools go, I guess. And there were some schools there, and a bunch of the kids at the schools were wearing yellow or orange shirts, but most people weren't. And people are done with this whole thing. It's like, that was an interesting waylay, but now let's get back to the business of actually governing the country and fixing real problems that a majority of people are dealing with. National Post says the slippery slope reality of criminalizing residential school denialism, and denialism is in quotes. It's pretty hard to trust the system when its major components get basic facts wrong and insist on sticking to them years later. Yeah, this is an opinion piece being run in the National Post. It says it's easy to downplay the residential school system. Here's one example. It wasn't as bad as the Holocaust, which saw millions of people exterminated, or the Holodomor, which saw millions more intentionally starved to death. That doesn't mean it didn't harm people, but it wasn't as bad as the full-on genocides that have happened in the same time period. There, I just did it. Further, I think that the fact that like we don't even have to compare to other atrocities. We don't have to say, it wasn't as bad as the Tutsi Hutu thing. It wasn't as bad, wasn't as bad as the killing fields, right? We don't have to go through all of that. Pol Pot, right? Like we don't have to do that. We don't have to compare. All we have to do is say the whole thing, this whole misguided journey was initially started by a falsehood, claiming that they found bodies when they never found bodies. There weren't any bodies. They found shadows on ground-penetrating radar and spun that into what it's become. And it's based on a falsehood. And so starting with the premise of it's not as bad as any of these things, I reject that as a premise because it's bullshit. It's bullshit. It's not even true. We need to establish the fact that residential schools were run by the church. Somebody said it wasn't run by the Catholic Church. Somebody in the comments the other day said it wasn't run specifically by the Catholic Church. But I thought that it was. I'll have to do some more reading, so apologies if I'm getting this wrong. I could be. But fundamentally, when this system was brought up, the Canadian government was a separate entity to the residential schools because the residential schools were run by the Catholic Church. Now, there may have been funding, and then that led to the crossover, right? And in 1969, Jean Chrétien was the Minister for Indian Affairs, and he was in charge of the whole thing, right? And why hasn't anybody asked him a damn question? I've got that on another tab. But starting this whole thing with the falsehoods of there were bodies found, and sure, that's bad, but it's not as bad as these other things. Very gauche, because again, it starts with the basic premise being a lie. It's a lie. It's a lie, and we should acknowledge that, right? But they're trying to criminalize speech, talking about that. They're trying to criminalize anybody saying, no, this is wrong. We're not talking about this in the correct way. And when have they done that before in the past? When have they criminalized denying some other world event? Trudeau says it himself. When we get to that in a minute. Anyway, National Post continues. For now, a 911 call reporting this blasphemous paragraph that I just read won't go far, but that could change. On Thursday, NDP MP Leah Gazin tabled a bill that would send the whole spectrum of residential school denialists and downplayers to jail for up to 2 years. Anyone who is caught publicly misrepresenting facts about residential schools or condoning, denying, downplaying, or justifying them in the course of willfully promoting hatred against Indigenous peoples could be found guilty if Bill C-413 passes. Would hatred of Indigenous peoples, would withholding water from Indigenous reserves be included under hatred of Indigenous peoples, or is it just if you say mean things online? Ridiculous. There are, of course, limits. That the bill's proponents will especially be keen to point out. The draft crime comes with a set of draft defenses: truth, good faith religious discourse, public interest in communication of hateful materials. Beyond that, courts have established, albeit foggy, limits to hate promotion crimes as well. Only the most intense forms of dislike are in scope, and considerations must be made for the circumstances, tone, and audience of the speech in question. But it's hard to feel much confidence that these limits will hold, considering how fast we're headed down the slippery slope, which is more of an inevitability than a fallacy. So they carry on, and I'm not going to carry on. But the whole point is, I think it is a very, very bad idea to criminalize speech, especially speech that questions the government's narrative on things, because when you do that, you will inevitably get to a point where the truth is being hidden and protected by the government who you're trying to hold accountable. And again, if you start, if you have a map and you think you're at one location or square on the grid on the map, and you're not, you're on a different square on the grid on the map, then where you intend to go, you'll never get there, right? And so if the map is your solution, is your way of solving the problem, and you are not starting at a place of truth or reality, and then you try and follow your map to get a resolution, you're not going to end up where you expect, right? And maybe that's by design. Maybe they don't want you to end up being able to challenge this at all. And so they start it all with a lie. It's built on a falsehood that they can't prove, haven't proved, won't prove, and have no interest in changing any of that. So they gave $8 million to chiefs and said, just go with it. Just be quiet. Okay, thanks. So that was our money, by the way. Rob says there's one politician still alive who had direct involvement in residential schools, John Chrétien. I don't hear any news of protests about him. I wonder why. Was he a residential tyrant, right? Was he the, what's it called? Miss Trenchball from Matilda, right? And so, but Miss Trenchball is the tyrant school teacher for Matilda who's terrible, and she comes in and she puts kids in awful situations and like punishes them for nothing, and everybody's afraid of her. And then Matilda at the end gets her revenge, of course. But is Jean Chrétien walking around terrorizing Indigenous children in 1971? Is that what he's doing? Nobody seems to care. Nobody seems to have any questions at all for him. He oversaw genocide. He oversaw people being buried or something being buried, maybe just tree roots, who knows, in Indigenous schools, and he didn't do anything, and became prime minister and didn't do anything, and nobody's got any questions for him. So that's weird, right? Don't you think? But nobody's going to follow up with that, right? Rebel News isn't going to follow up with that. Here's Greg, and what a spectacular, he's knocking it out of the park, this guy, Jeepers Creepers. He put together 10 minutes doing like a walk and talk, talking about National Truth and Reconciliation Day, and I think he's very, very spot on. He's got his finger on the pulse on this one, in my opinion. So here's a few minutes, maybe 1.5 of Greg. It's 9 minutes long, 9.5 minutes long. So link will be in the description, fingers crossed. And you should check that out if you're interested. Here we go.
Truth and Reconciliation Day. Is it me, or is this day all about hating white people and Canadian history? When this day rolls around, I think of Jagmeet Singh and other politicians wearing orange shirts, collectively shitting on white Canadians and our history. Am I wrong? If today was really about treating Indigenous people better, maybe we talk about the Indian Act, where some Indigenous communities don't even have access to clean drinking water, and they are hopelessly dependent still on the Canadian government. Instead, today we glorify Indigenous victimhood, pump the nation up with grievance porn, and really, what's the goal? Personally, I think it's to guilt trip white Canadians and shame anyone who dares to be proud of Canadian history. Ironically, fresh off the boat, East Indians will jump on this bandwagon to shame Canadians here for being colonizers. Well, quite frankly, if you look around, I think it's us being colonized right now. But anyway, Truth and Reconciliation Day. We know what truth means, but did you know reconciliation means the restoration of friendly relations? How on earth does telling a completely one-sided interpretation of history that demonizes white Canadians as a whole help build friendly relations and not resentment? Because this day, I think, normalizes that resentment and hatred towards white Canadians and everything to do with our European and Christian history. If Canadian institutions really wanted to treat Indigenous people better, or wanted to improve relations among all Canadians with real truth and real reconciliation, why would they be obsessed with silencing all opposition to the oversimplified narrative that Canadian history is purely genocidal? Even Indigenous people who have different interpretations of this history or give sympathy to anything white or Christian get sidelined by journalists or smeared by the hate experts. A recent True North podcast about residential schools was censored from Spotify because it was reported for harmful content. A Canadian Antifa-aligned journalist celebrated this, and an NDP member of Parliament called this censorship good journalism. Teachers in Canada have been fired for simply pointing out simple truths that poke holes in this narrative, like some of these Indigenous kids in Kamloops died of tuberculosis. But nope, no fact-checking allowed, you're cancelled. A Global News article from a year ago suggested that even questioning this narrative is violence, and we've seen the Cancel Canada Day campaigns on July 1st, and the Canadian news media will amplify activists who claim celebrating Canada Day is the same thing as celebrating mass graves. Even the good old RCMP echoes this sentiment that stating true stories that oppose the prevailing genocide narrative can be dangerous. You see, Canada, if you don't agree with this oversimplified version of Canadian history, which implies white people are genocidal maniacs, then you'll get branded a residential school denialist. In fact, last week, a new law, C-413, would make residential school denialism a crime. It's clear.
I said C-400 or C-483. I was so close. 413. Darn, one number off. It's like The Price is Right. So yeah, good. We listened to 3 minutes. And it was quick, right? It's a quick 3 minutes. Sometimes when you listen to Kamala Harris, it seems like a really long 40 seconds, and then a quick 3 minutes from Greg, right? So it's very interesting how malleable time seems to be, flexible, elastic, really weird, right? Dan Crenshaw, he's got the one eye patch look going on. He says, this is a frightening philosophy. According to Kamala Harris, disaster aid should be based on race and gender, not how much water your flooded home. Not much how much water is in your flooded home. So I'm putting this here. I've got a lot to talk about of the U.S. at the end of the show today, just with the flooding and the difference between Kamala Harris and Biden and Trump and what's going on there. And I think it's an interesting juxtaposition because I think that we're in the same boat, but I'll get there later. And I think that what's going on, though, is interesting because they're trying to make everything two-tiered. They're trying to make it race-based, and they're trying to make old stock Americans, white Americans, but not even just white Americans, but they're trying to do it by race, but also they're trying to sideline old stock black Americans too. They're trying to put them on the bottom of the list, but like the top of the bottom of the list, right? Before those white guys, but not before these other Haitian guys, right? We know they're black too, but whatever. So it's a very interesting situation that's happening. Again, it's not exactly the same in Canada as in the United States, but it rhymes. You can see that it's part of the same song, right? And this is a coordinated thing. This is not happening by accident. And this is not good sense. This is people being told what to do by masters, okay? Here, and Kamala Harris is not smart. Also, somebody was saying when she says nonsense things and laughs, she's trying to be cute. She's trying to get on your, disarm you and get on your good side. That's what that whole act is about. There's nothing between her ears. She's not an intelligent person. She's just repeating talking points badly, basically. Anyway, here's Kamala Harris being an airhead. Here we go.
It is our lowest income communities and our communities of color that are most impacted by these extreme conditions and impacted by issues that are not of their own making. And so women. Absolutely. And so we have to address this in a way that is about giving resources based on equity, understanding that we fight for equality, but we also need to fight for equity, understanding not everyone starts out at the same place. And if we want people to be in an equal place, sometimes we have to take into account those disparities. And do that work. It is.
If we want to make sure everybody's equal, we could just bring in communism. Yay! No thanks. John is a CAF veteran, and he's opinion columnist for the Washington Standard. He says, if a synagogue gets firebombed, it garners national condemnation. If mosques get attacked or vandalized, it garners national condemnation. But dozens of churches get burnt to the ground, and it's crickets. And Western Standard is reporting another Saskatchewan church burned to the ground. And why is the moral foundation buildings in our country being burnt in Canada? A theocratic society, would not tolerate their faith being eradicated. Those who fail to understand the wisdom of their enemy welcomes to be conquered by their geniuses. So I think that we're in a later stage of the attack. An earlier stage of the attack is creating a situation where going to church was no longer prioritized by the family. So many families stop prioritizing going to church. That destroys that church community, but also destroys the religion as such more broadly. But it survives because there are people who will just keep going because it was already ingrained in them and it's something that they do, et cetera, et cetera. And then so as you move through and you've kind of hollowed out the church and stopped new people coming, now it's ripe for being switched over because the people who are still in the church don't have a lot of fight left, and the people who are there, the traditions of the church are kind of old and antiquated, and it's the attack on religion has been 50, 60 years, and they're going to try and reinvigorate religion on the side of the United Nations, one world religion, united church model, I think. But in order to do that, they have to get rid of, I think burning the buildings is just a part of getting rid of that culture and destroying the old Christianity, akin to removing the four olds for when China did their Great Leap Forward, right? It's part of removing the architecture of that to remove the reminders, so on and so forth. And then as you remove that and people move forward, if they look for religious answers, that building doesn't offer any question or any answers anymore. It's gone, right? You can't even accidentally stumble upon anything. It's been destroyed. And so maybe that's the point. But this keeps happening. And we, on one side, say it's terrible, 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 this truth and reconciliation, what Canada did. We have to make sure that we never ever do that again because, you know, we're terrible people, us Canadians, right? And then on the other side of things, we've got, I guess it makes perfect sense actually if you think about it, because on one side the government's saying this group of people are terrible and they drove all of this bad stuff that's happened in Canada. And so people are responding, and if you incentivize something, you get more of it, and saying, okay, I'll get rid of those bad people. And people will have interviews and talk about how terrible white people are openly, very, very openly, and they don't see how racist that is or anything to that effect. And that's weird because you'd think that, like, if they saw somebody talking about a different race in the same way that they were talking about white people, they would say, hey, hold on a second, that's pretty racist. But because it's white people, that's totally fine. Weird, right? Something to notice. Here's Justin Trudeau talking about residential schools again, and he gets asked about the denialism bill, and he doesn't shoot it down completely, of course. He's very interested in that, and he harkens back to Holocaust denialism and saying we're the government that criminalized Holocaust denialism, and so, you know, we'll definitely look at this. So here's Justin Trudeau with his smarmy grin. Here we go. Justin Trudeau warning, what is it, a minute and a half? We won't listen to that long. Here we go.
Hi, Lisa Johnson from the Canadian Press. The NDP put forward a private member's bill last week aiming to criminalize residential school denialism. This likely won't go anywhere unless the government takes it on. Will your Liberal government support this bill?
We will look very carefully at this bill. Obviously, anytime people are putting limits on free speech, a free and democratic society needs to take careful steps. We were the government that criminalized Holocaust denial over the past number of years, so we're certainly going to make sure that Canada continues to move forward on reconciliation. Part of that is recognizing what happened with residential schools. Quite frankly, what we're seeing over the past years is more and more Canadians becoming aware of Canada's history, of understanding the work that we all have to do around reconciliation. We see school kids wearing
all indoctrination nonsense, wearing orange shirts, pretending that what happened was completely bad and only one race's fault is erroneous and stupid. And I reject this stupid prime minister completely. Gov.exe says Justin Trudeau says freedom of speech is important in a free and democratic society. That's why his government is planning on limiting free speech with Bill C-63. Justin Trudeau can't go a day without exposing himself as a massive hypocrite. Too many lies. Yeah, he's terrible. He's terrible. Jim from The Office reminds us through meme, how do you tell who's telling the truth? And the ones trying to silence other people are the ones lying. So yeah, I feel like that's very accurate and applicable for multiple of these videos. Here's Robert Kennedy in the States saying that AOC is trying to rein in the media environment. Ian Miles Chong shares this AOC video. He says AOC, along with several other members of Congress, are looking into ways of reining in the media environment. She says that censorship is necessary so that you can't just spew disinformation. Who made her the arbiter of truth? They're coming for X. Here's AOC, and this is exactly what Canadian politicians think and how they're trying to pass laws.
You know, I do think that several members of Congress in some of my discussions have brought up media literacy because that is a part of what happened here. And we're going to have to figure out how we rein in our media environment so that you can't just spew disinformation and misinformation. It's one thing to have differing opinions, but it's another thing entirely to just say things that are false. And so that's something that we're looking into. You know,
who gets to define what is false, right? If I say Pokeroo was here earlier and we had a blast, but when my friend showed up, Pokeroo was just gone. and I can't explain it. Is that disinformation or misinformation? What raises that to a higher level, or was what I was saying earlier, where was no bodies found with the residential schools? Is that misinformation or disinformation? And who's to say, right? Like, if a Canadian politician disagrees with me, why are they correct and I'm not, right? And like, they can't produce evidence to back up their claims of bodies have been found, because bodies haven't been found. And I think that I can produce evidence to back up my claim, and yet we continue to participate in this farce. So if I say perhaps not truthfully, the Pokeroo was here earlier, that's no problem, right? That doesn't hurt anybody, I guess, right? But if I say something that may hurt the narrative, well, now you're tap dancing on a problem there, sir, right? If you start talking about what happened in Germany in the 1940s, right? Ooh, yowza, right? So interesting how that works. The censorship is solely, the only reason they use it is to bolster and protect the narrative, because the narrative is more important than anything else, right? So here's Bill Gates. He's talking, what can we use AI for? Obviously, anybody who's telling people misinformation like you shouldn't get vaccinated. Here we go.
We should have free speech, but if you're inciting violence, if you're causing people not to take vaccines, where are those boundaries that even the U.S. Should have rules? And then if you have rules...
Who is this guy? Even the U.S. should have rules. Okay, Bill Gates, get lost, buddy. See you later. The U.S. should have rules. I read the documents that created the United States, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, all that. Meh. Why didn't they include misinformation about vaccines in there? Oh, it was irresponsible of those guys. George Washington. What do you do? Bill Gates knows what he's talking about. Bull poop. Get out of here. Are you kidding me? Like, people accept this stuff. Like, this guy has some kind of clout. He's just hand waved away the Constitution. Oh yeah, the United States should. And then if you do in the United States, what are the rules around that? Get lost. What a loser. Unbelievable.
Rules, and then if you have rules, what is it? Is there some AI that encodes those rules because you have billions of activity, and if you catch it a day later, the harm is done?
Everybody watches my show the first day I release it. Everybody. Like, it's very rare. I mean, sometimes I know people watch weekend shows. My weekend shows have like abysmal viewership until like Wednesday, when people have caught up, because they drive to work and they drive home, and they drive to work and they drive home. And so by the time the second drive home, they're caught up, right? And they're like, oh, okay, I don't have anything else, except that Sundays I have the kitchen table talk. So actually my Saturday viewership is actually kind of dipping because there's so much content. So sorry, everyone. But regardless of all of that, people watch the show right away. And so he's right. Like, if you don't have censorship where you won't be able to watch the show, the damage is done. It's the reason the damage is done is because I'm the guy who they brought into the room with the ringing bell, bing, 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 and the standing and the sitting actors. I'm the guy who's like, F your bell. I'm just going to sit here. And like, what are you going to do about it? And they come in and say, come with me, sir. And that's the only thing they can do. And so that's Bill Gates advocating to remove the Constitution and free speech from the Constitution. Because, you should have some kind of limitations. I can't believe the founding fathers forgot vaccine misinformation from the founding documents. Psh, right? Give me a break, Bill Gates. Here is Robert Kennedy Jr. to tell us how tyrants work and the 3 rules of tyrants. Here we go.
I want you all to remember 3 things. 3 rules. One is that when you give a government a power, it will never voluntarily relinquish it. Second rule, if you give a government a power, it will ultimately abuse that power to the maximum extent possible. And the third rule is that nobody ever complied their way out of totalitarianism.
So, make America healthy again, right? So that's the Robert Kennedy branding for MAGA. So that's interesting. Lots of people are excited for him to be on the Trump campaign. And he actually said the other day, and I may have this in the US section, but he was saying that Trump gave him a package that puts him in charge of all of the 3-letter agencies and branches of the military for holding them accountable. So I thought that was an interesting thing to do. Eugenics. We have to talk about eugenics really quickly. I talk often about how Building your family is a lot more important than building your career. And if you have kids, they might be there on your deathbed, like if you're dying in the hospital and things like that. But Karen from accounting or the HR lady is not going to be there. She's just not. You should work on building your family, because when your mom and dad are gone and your brothers and sisters are gone, you might want a wife and kids who are there, who care about you, right? It might be beneficial, or like you might want a husband and kids, right? Vice versa, whatever it is. And so like, that is a worthwhile endeavor. And so the more I think about it, the more I think to myself, is the birth control pill a net benefit to society? Does the birth control pill increase the likelihood that somebody's going to be an OnlyFans star? One. And two, does the birth control pill represent a direct attack on the ability of a nation to maintain its population at levels needed for the society to continue? If no, and I think that after 3 generations, it's no. Like, I think there's a reason in the 80s we were looking at, we need to start bringing people in. We needed people to replace those kids that weren't being born, right? And so we started bringing people in. And now the net result in all of that is our society is collapsing. And I'm sorry, that's just the truth. Right now, it's the truth. Look at the United States. Oh my gosh, look at the United States. So, and I'll talk about my worries about that, but I think what's happening is they're spending too much money in foreign countries like Ukraine or Palestine or wherever it is, foreign countries, period. And they're not spending any money on infrastructure in the United States. So like, while they weren't spending any money on infrastructure in the United States in 1989, if they got a hurricane, the infrastructure was able to handle it in an okay way, right? They were able to put things back together. It cost money, but it was repairable. Things were okay. Things were as okay as they could be after a hurricane, but it wasn't catastrophic, right? Fast forward 40 years, right? And the spending on the infrastructure is not kept up with the wear and tear on bridges and things like that. Now a hurricane comes through and the damage is catastrophic. And that's the net result of 40 years of sending money outside of the country, washing money out of the tax base, and not repairing infrastructure that's used every day, necessary for the American people. But the money's not been there because it's been washed out by politicians who work for the globalists, China, India, who knows, right? Not the United States. The United States has been under attack for a very long time. And so I look at that and I think to myself, jeepers creepers, was the birth control pill a very insidious attack by eugenicists? Hello everyone, thanks very much for watching. This is just a short version of a longer show. If you'd like to get the whole show, you can go over to canadapoly.com and sign up for a subscription. Just look in the drop-down tab for shop and donate and look for subscriptions, and you'll get immediate access to the full show. Love to see you. Thanks for watching, everybody. Have a wonderful, wonderful